Harry's Wife, Part 101.20. Spotify checks. Is she wanting back in? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. I explained in an earlier part at 101.19 the suggestion that King Charles is looking to torpedo archetypes. But further news has been presented that Harry's wife actually might be doing some vetting of her own material. What fresh madness is this, I hear you say? Well, let's dive in. And first of all, it's an article from International Business Times written by Vian Burog, headed, Harry's wife changing her tune after Queen's death, removes podcast content offensive to monarchy. Harry's wife is reviewing the upcoming episodes of her podcast, Archetypes, in the wake of Queen Elizabeth's death. This is to prevent her content from being interpreted as offensive by any of her grieving relatives in the United Kingdom, reports said. Royal commentator Neil Sean said, "There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on Harry's wife's remaining podcasts as the British community mourns the death of their Queen. We know there's been 4 in the can already that are ready to go," he said. But according to a very good source, they're going through them all with a very fine tooth comb to make sure there's nothing derogatory, hurtful, or indeed that could cause yet another explosive time bomb, Sean added. Harry's wife launched her Spotify podcast on August 23rd and has released 3 episodes each week since. On Monday, she observed the official mourning period for Queen Elizabeth when she withheld the new episodes of her podcast, Facade Management. New episodes of Archetypes will be paused during the official mourning period for Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, she said in a statement, naturally bringing attention to herself rather than just pausing it and leaving it. Sean noted there are 2 ways to interpret Harry's wife's gesture. One of those is that she wants to reconcile with Prince Harry's relatives in the United Kingdom. You could look at this 2 ways, really. Is Harry's wife changing her tune now to try and fit back into the family that she left behind? Or indeed, is she having second thoughts because she doesn't want to cause any more trouble, Sean said. The former actress's tension with her in-laws is no secret. Harry and Harry's wife stepped down as senior members of the royal family in 2020 amid intense media scrutiny and left the United Kingdom for good. A year after stepping down, the couple opened up in an exclusive interview with Oprah, talking about how joining the royal family had taken a toll on Harry's wife's mental health. Revision of history, pity play. The weekend after the Queen's death, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex set their personal issues aside, no they didn't, when they appeared alongside Prince William and Kate, this is what the article says, for a joint walkabout, to meet crowds of mourners paying their last respects at Windsor. The last time the 4 had been seen together was when they attended the Commonwealth Day celebrations in March 2020. So, International Business Times reporting what Neil Sean has to say, that there's vetting of the podcasts, that offensive material is to be removed, which is interesting because that therefore confirms that there must be something in there which was offensive, which demonstrates her sense of entitlement, need to manipulate, absence of emotional empathy, and lack of accountability for her behaviours. But there's also news from the Daily Express. In an article by Leah Paxton tells us this. Harry's wife's team going over podcast episodes with fine-tooth comb to avoid royal row. Harry's wife has been in the UK since the beginning of September, with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex expected to stay until the ceremonies for the Queen's state funeral have concluded. While the Duchess remains overseas, a production team for her podcast series have reportedly scrambled to review the content of upcoming episodes in light of the Queen's death. Royal commentator Neil Sean claimed a dedicated team has been tasked with running through future episodes with a fine-tooth comb in order to eliminate comments that could spark further controversy. Speaking on his YouTube channel, Mr. Sean said Harry's wife has a big problem because, as we know, she's decided to launch herself onto the world stage as an interviewer. He continued, "It's her podcast, and I would guess that she is allowed to say exactly what she wants, but now there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes for the remaining podcasts." The Duchess of Sussex launched her podcast series in August, with the first episode featuring tennis star Serena Williams as a special guest. New episodes have been released weekly, although the recording anticipated for Tuesday has not been published on Spotify. This development has led to speculation that producers have decided to pull the content for further editing in order to limit further potential public fallout. Streaming network Spotify has added a note to the description of Harry's Wife podcast to explain the delay. New episodes of Archetypes will be paused during the official mourning period for Her Majesty the Queen. It then repeats information that you've already heard. Thus, there's speculation that as part of this pause, that there's a team actually going through it, or it's held on good authority that this is what is happening. As always, I leave it for you to determine the veracity in that regard as to this material. But on the assumption that this is what is actually happening and that there is a team working through it, why would this be done? Has all of a sudden Harry's wife developed a conscience about what's contained in her podcasts and therefore is careful to ensure that there's nothing said that might offend given the death of Queen Elizabeth II? Of course fucking not. She's a narcissist. She doesn't give two figs about anybody else's feelings. Instead, of course, it's facade management. Probably as a consequence of advice that she's received from her production team, which she has gone along with because her narcissism deems that it's appropriate to do so, she has given the green light to a tooth-combing exercise of the podcast to make sure that there's nothing controversial in there that would ultimately present damage to the facade. She doesn't see it as a facade, remember, but her narcissism does, and that such material would amount to a threat to control. The uninformed will think, "Oh, this is really good of her to make sure that she's looking through these things to ensure that there's nothing that might upset the royal family. See, she does care." No, she does not. First of all, if there's material that's in there in the first place that could cause offence, that demonstrates that she doesn't care. It's a little bit like punching somebody in the face and saying, "Ooh, I'm sorry you got punched." You still fucking punched them, didn't you? The fact that she's now redacting it, or potentially redacting it, is nothing to do with her caring about other people, but is all about saving her own face, i.e., dealing with a potential threat to control and of managing the facade to ensure that there's no further controversy. Might it, though, be something beyond that, beyond facade management, in that she's tidying up her act as a possibility of reintroduction to the royal family? Well, one might think that that's a possibility, and of course, when you're dealing with a narcissist such as her, nothing's off the table with regard to the brass-necked behaviour. Many of you listening would be thinking, seriously, after everything she's done, does she really think she could walk back into the royal family? Short answer is yes. The compartmentalisation that her narcissism engages in would cause her to do that she doesn't see that she's done anything wrong, because her narcissism will convince her that she hasn't done anything wrong, in the same way that she's thrown brickbats and mud repeatedly and then turns up at the Platinum Jubilee because her narcissism deems that she can, and she doesn't see anything wrong with it. She shows no shame or embarrassment floozying around at the shushing of the colour and sashaying down the aisle at the ceremony, or rather the service of booing. Again, her narcissism would blind her to her own behaviour, justify it and explain how it's everybody else's fault and that she's the victim, and the least that they could do is allow her back into the royal family to say sorry for the way that she's been treated. That's how her narcissism will play it. Whether this actually happens remains to be seen. My view is at this juncture, although it's a possibility, I don't see it as a probability, mainly because she will still believe that she can do it herself overseas, and her narcissism, facing, of course, the repeated snubbing that she's had from the Princess of Wales and Sophie, Countess of Wessex, and no doubt other members of the royal family, that at the moment it's a bridge too far, and instead there might be a slow burn to try and get back in, perhaps trying to cozy up to King Charles, who really needs to sort himself out and ensure that he asserts control appropriately by continuing his wishes that they remain overseas and that they build their lives there, as indicated in his one-line mention. Accordingly, I don't see that this is a step that's being taken for immediate attempts to be reintroduced into the royal family, but rather it is a face-saving exercise for the purpose of assertion of control and facade management. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.